And hello, fabulous AP students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. Today, we're going to talk about the reactions to the industrial economy by many of the governments who will come in contact with industrial societies and how their responses towards that would be. So, a lot of interesting things happening. People embrace it, some people won't embrace it. So, it'll be interesting. Let's begin. So, we have here labor unions are going to start to form, okay, because of the dangerous and unsanitary working conditions, low wages, and long hours that are prevalent in factory life. That is going to lead to groups that are going to rise up who are going to be a spokesperson for the working class and trying to get them better working conditions. People are going to say that people are being abused in the factories and that there needs to be reform. And the labor unions are going to be a means for that reformation to occur. Labor unions will be unpopular in the 1800s because they're going to be a threat to the economy, to production, which is pretty much everything at this point. However, by the 1900s, they're going to become more accepted and even mainstream. Unions will improve workers' lives by winning minimum wage laws, limits on work hours, overtime pay, and creating the 5-day work week as we know it today. So, some of the major reforms that you'll see are voting rights. And so, for example, in Britain, the voting pool is going to get expanded. That means that there are going to be laws that are going to pass that's going to reduce the property ownership qualifications for voting. So in Britain, you kind of had to own property in order to vote. And so that kind of kicked some people out from being able to vote and have a voice. And so a lot of those laws are going to become less strict, and there's going to be more allowances for people who may not have property or even a lot of property. This will also lead to a movement known as the Right to Vote movement, and all men will get the right to vote around 1918 in Great Britain, and then that will segue into women's suffrage in 1928. So again, we're seeing reforms occur, and that's going to continue to change things moving forward. Um, Labor laws are also going to become very important. So in 1843, we're going to see laws being passed where children, for example, under the age of 10, they can't work in coal mines. So it's dangerous, and why we putting little children in there so they can die early of black lung or whatever. And so there's going to be laws that are going to protect children. By the way, I mean, if you're a little child and the guy who you're getting paid is telling you go down there and do this really dangerous thing, you either do it or you don't get paid. And so a lot of children were sort of coerced in doing things that they really shouldn't be doing in the workforce, highly dangerous. But because they're little children, there's an intimidation factor, right? So in 1881, law was passed requiring that all children from the age of 5 to 10 go get an education. So instead of being in the factories, they should be in schools. And so we're seeing, again, more of these changes happening. There's going to be more focus on education rather than making money. And that's going to start redefining the children's role in urban society. So anyway, good and interesting things. We have another individual known as Karl Marx. Karl Marx is the father of communism, Marxism, socialism to a degree, although socialists were around when he was around, so he doesn't make up the socialist movement, but he defines a lot of what we now know today as socialism. He had a friend. His name was Frederick Engels. Engels was also he was kind of like a cheerleader for Karl Marx. He had a lot of faith in Karl Marx. He funded Karl Marx. Engels, his father was a factory owner and, benefited from capitalism. And Frederick Engels kind of inherited a lot of that money, and he used that money to decry capitalism and to fund Karl Marx. so that he can continue his research. So the two of them are going to write a thing called the Communist Manifesto, which is what's known today. Um, so Karl Marx believed that capitalism produced great wealth, but also great poverty through dividing society into two classes. So according to him, capitalism makes two classes. One is the proletariat, that's the working class struggling to make ends meet, and the other one is the bourgeoisie, which is the middle class that owned, the machines and the factories, basically the owners, if you will, the people who are the hirers instead of the hirees. Um, Marx believed that the proletariat needed to recognize their shared interests as a class and take control of the means of production, sharing the wealth they created fairly. So he basically was saying, hey, you working class, I don't think you realize how much power you really do have. Um, there's more of you than there are of the people who own factories, basically. And so if you guys just sort of band together, then you guys can kind of control all the means of production, and you guys can distribute it up fairly. Um, and that's the idea. So, theoretically, it's very attractive what he's trying to say. So he has here kind of like a scale, if you will. So you have capitalism. So you take capitalism and then you slowly get into socialism. And then from socialism, you get it to communism. And that's kind of his final stage of economic development where all class distinctions would end. So this idea that, we take a capitalist society and move it towards socialism, and then from socialism to communism. Um, Understand that when Marx was around, there were socialists around. So he doesn't start the socialist movement, like utopian socialists. But they believed in changing a government, through a slow evolution process. So slowly kind of introducing more programs that would promote socialism and government expansion. So these people believe that to change the government and the problems through slow evolution process. However, Marx, instead of changing it through evolution, he wanted to change it through revolution. So he believed that the best way to do it is overthrow a society um, is to cause a revolution to occur. And that's how a lot of the communist countries today will form, is through this idea of revolution. Uh, let's go to the next one. John Stuart Mill. So John Stuart Mill, he has a bit of a different attitude as Karl Marx. Karl Marx wanted to just basically say capitalism doesn't work, and we're just going to throw the whole thing away and open up another government that's more favorable for the people. That he just wanted to just do away with the whole government economic system of free market system and capitalism. John Stuart Mill's a little different. Uh, he championed legal reform. He think it was important to have labor unions. He thought it was important to limit child labor and to ensure safer working conditions in the factory. He didn't want to overthrow capitalism. He wanted to reform it. So that's the difference between Mills and Mill and Marx. Is Marx just wants to overthrow the whole thing, and Mill is saying, look, when the problem arises, let's reform it. Okay, no government's perfect, but let's make laws where we can keep the people safe. So his way of thinking became somewhat known as utilitarianism. Unlike utopian socialists who want to replace capitalism altogether, utilitarianism want to make laws of protection as the need arises. They wanted gradual reform, not radical reform like the socialists. So the Ottoman Empire's response to industrialization, Ottomans resisted the trend to industrialize in the early 1800s. As the decline in power, they began making reforms to make the empire more suitable for industrialization. So the Ottoman are realizing, okay, we're about to lose everything. We got to figure this out. They're going to start implementing the Tanzimat reforms. And these are reforms that are going to be used to sort of help the Ottoman Empire get more into the industrial age and the modernized age. They're going to try and get that corruption out of the central government. They're going to start expanding education, and they're going to start allowing people to get an education, to be equal under the law and education, regardless of their religion or ethnicity. So they're going to try and do away with those discriminatory acts that they used to do in the past with, like janissaries and def shirme and things like that we talked about in the past. Ultimately, all these reforms towards industrialization failed, and the empire continued to weaken and was dissolved after World War I. So it's kind of like too little, too late. It took them too long and too slowly to industrialize, and so it's not really going to take root. There's going to be opposition to the Ottoman Empire during this whole time as well. You have the central government, although the sultans are going to support reforms, they're still going to try and keep a tight hold on the empire. Remember, to modernize or to westernize means you have to kind of give up your old way of thinking, and some people aren't willing to do that because part of that is power. Another group that advocates for secular change were the Young Turks, and they're going to be driven into exile. And then another major thing is you got many minority groups. They're become very angry with the discriminatory practices of the Ottoman Empire. And between 1894 and 1896, you're going to have about 100,000 to 250,000 Armenians who were killed throughout several provinces. This tragedy is known as the Hamidian massacres. Sultan Abdul Hamid received the nickname the Red Sultan for these massacres. And the Ottoman Empire isn't done with the Armenians. In World War I, there's going to be another very serious massacre where as many as 1 million Armenians are slaughtered. Okay, so we have the reform efforts in China. So the Qing dynasty has been resisting modernizing for the first half of the 1800s. However, they're going to now realize that we got to do this because we're losing. We're weakened. People are starting to take advantage of us because we don't have the same technology. We don't have the same production power or anything like that that these other places had. So they're going to start something called the self-strengthening movement. And what's really going to catapult this attitude is we're going to see the Sino-Japanese War, and China's going to lose pretty handily. If it weren't for the Western Europeans who basically tell Japan, no, you're not coming over here. If you do, you have us to deal with. So then Japan will back off, But Japan is obviously a powerhouse in East Asia because they embraced industrialization, whereas China is still sort of dragging their feet, and there's internal conflict happening as well, where not everyone's on board in China with westernization and modernization. They are going to start some reforms. This is known as the 100-Day Reforms, where they're going to abolish the outdated civil service examination. They're going to try to root out government corruption. They're going to establish westernized industrial, commercial, and medical systems. So they're trying to make those steps. However, this happens. So you have the Emperor of China who wants to reform. However, Empress Dowager Si Qi, so I'm going to say this, Empress Dowager Si Qi favored the traditional ways and formed a coup d'etat and imprisoned the emperor. So even with the high levels of government, we have insurrection happening because people aren't ready to jump in that direction. Her traditional mindset and the Boxer Rebellion, which is another war that Chinese who did not want to have all that foreign influence, there was a big fight. I mean, big war. They call it the Boxer Rebellion because the English, and other Western powers saw this group fighting, and it was basically like kung fu that they were using, but it looked like boxing to them, so they just called it the Boxer Rebellion. But anyway, so we have internal strife happening in China where not everyone's on board here. The Empress is later going to realize that they do need to modernize because China just continues to decline. And a lot of their systems are just ineffectual, like the civil service exam just really didn't in a modern society, it didn't. The questions and the things they focused on just weren't compatible. In this weakened state, the Japanese would threaten um, to attack China. China's going to seek territorial protection from the Western powers. However, the Western powers are going to be like, okay, well, we'll protect you, but you're going to have to make more trade concessions with us where it's to our advantage. And they're going to have to go along with it because they're kind of stuck. And then in Japan, we're going to see some resistance happening as well to the Meiji Restoration. One thing is they're going to kind of do away with the samurai. They're going to consider samurai old-fashioned, and they're going to tell them that you cannot be samurai anymore. You can't you can't carry swords. You can't wear the clothing. Can't wear the hairstyle. Basically, we're all westernizing and modernizing, and everything that used to be about Japan is over. So here's a picture of a bunch of samurai who are fighting against the central government. They don't like this. They don't like the changes, and they don't want to see this Western attitude to the point where they're erasing the whole samurai class, which is them, because now they lose power. However, some samurai adjusted to the new changes and even served the government as generals or elder statesmen. So some samurai will embrace the new change and will benefit from it. And then we're going to see a lot of effects happening in Japan. We're going to see new schools improving, literary rates going up for males and females. We're going to see the economy rapidly industrialized. We're going to see traits of democracy like the freedom of the press, strong labor unions, respect for individual liberties. The Charter Oath, as you know, is going to be a kind of like a blueprint for how to make Japan stronger. So go ahead and write your one-page summary, and we'll see you then.